Namu MyoHoRenGeKyo. Namu MyoHoRenGeKyo. Namu MyoHoRenGeKyo. Okay, something we discussed yesterday. We'll imbue our study today of the continuing of the Gosho on protecting the nation, the treatise on protecting the nation. But before we get into that, thank you for being here. Namo MyoHoRenGeKyo. I hope you're healthy and secure. And so, yes, I mentioned yesterday or in the last video regarding sutras that claim to be, many sutras actually do this. They say, well, put away or disregard or put in the background everything I've taught you for the last few years, and now we're going to move on, and this is going to be the primary all-encompassing teaching for you. And one has to understand, and this is something that only comes from study of the entirety of Buddhist teachings. Certainly, people like Tendai, who reorganized or actually organized all of the extant teachings that had been translated into Chinese and put them in the proper order, context, periods of teachings. As you don't know unless you've studied, you can look this up on Google. You don't have to take my word for it. But there are periods of years where Shakyamuni taught the same sermon, albeit because he moved around and taught as much as he could travel, his audience would differ, and he would have the same verse sections of that sutra. It was all oral, so it was chanted, right? It was a singing, it was a song, so it had a pentameter, a rhythm, certainly in the Prakrit language that he was teaching in. And that was for memorization, getting the words in the proper order so that the meaning could be preserved in the teaching. So everyone learned that way. Repetition, 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 right? And then there's a more exploratory talk around that chanting, around that sermon that was directed toward the capacity of and the ideologies, the culture that he was addressing. And if you don't think there's a lot of variances in India today with over 125 distinct languages, I mean distinct, I don't mean dialects, I don't mean like Southern Americans talking to Yankees. They still can communicate, albeit they sound different. In India, these different languages, people can't communicate. It's almost impossible to fathom, isn't it? That there could be that many languages, official languages in one country. It's crazy. And certainly if they have languages that are that distinct, their cultural realities, the way they practice Hinduism or Jainism or whatever, their entire culture, their structure, have very individual traits. And yet within the nation, they all fit into a caste system. You know, if you're born a servant, then that's all you'll ever be, and your children will ever be, and so on and so forth. If your ancestors were traders and merchants, then you're a trader and a merchant. Period. There is no changing your caste in India to this day. So yes, the educational system is free, university system is free. That's why so many IT professionals in other countries are Indian. And they can come from a farming community and get those degrees, but they don't have opportunity in India. They have to go to other countries to be paid for, to be recognized for those skills. They go back home, they're farmers. It bends the brain a little bit. Anyway, I say all of that, and there may be caveats to that. I'm not privy to the last decade in India, but it's been thousands of years. They haven't changed much. My point being is that when Shakyamuni was walking around and traveling through India, he encountered very different flavors of the Indian people, right? And so he had to speak to their capacity. For the bulk of his lifetime of teachings, 40 or more years, right? And the verse portion was very much the same all the time. But the other portions describing what would be contained in the verse portion might have slightly different stories that might relate to those people. But the teaching was the same. Anyway, all of that is to say that when he sensed from his students that a good percentage of them had finally started to get it, whatever he was teaching in that sermon for years, when he started a new sermon in order to extend that capacity, extend that understanding, the way it's written and in the sermon, he would say, now that you know this, stop thinking about it. Stop focusing your life on that, because now I'm going to drop some new knowledge on you. And you need to now refocus on this. That you know. The alphabet you understand. Let's talk about reading and writing now. Right? And that's the most important thing. And then the next step would be, after so many years of teaching that, okay, everything you've learned about the alphabet and reading and writing, now let's talk about composition. And so just like anything, right? This is now the most important thing. Put all of that aside, because you know that. So if you don't understand how teaching happens, it'd be very easy to pick up a book in your school library on, for instance, algebra. And if it were presented in the same fashion, you might think algebra is the pinnacle of mathematics. And you go on through life for decades, and somebody comes to you and go, oh no, algebra is very useful, don't get me wrong, but that's not the pinnacle. But it says here in the book, algebra is the pinnacle. It was the pinnacle at the time because there was a paradigm shift that was needed by the people he was teaching. But it isn't, in fact, the pinnacle of the teachings. It's just that's the refocus for an extension to what is known. And if every book, every sermon along the way over decades is telling you this is the prime, this is what you need to learn, this is the focus, they can't all be the pinnacle of the teachings, can they? They're relative. And this is the point that Nichiren and Tendai and Miao and Dengyo is over hundreds of years kept showing the scholarship that when all is said and done, when all of the teachings are considered, it is the lotus that is the one vehicle, the primary vehicle, the culminating teachings of Shakyamuni. Because in the Lotus Sutra, he wasn't just teaching for others to understand, he was teaching his own experience. Here, do this, do as I have done. Awaken Buddha in your mind. Yeah? Self-practice. That's the Lotus Sutra. This is why it is the culmination of, the pinnacle of Buddhist teaching. And if you don't practice the scholarship that way, you're a false teacher. You're a teacher who doesn't understand the scholarship. You're a teacher whose motivations are other. And in Buddhism is very strict. If you're not doing it the way that Shakyamuni, the founder, the discoverer, is telling you how to do it, then what are you doing? Right? Okay. So all of that being a bit of a repetition, we enter a new stage of this teaching on the Treatise of Protecting the Nation. Question. Suppose we should discard the MyoHoRenGeKyo sutras not thoroughly revealing the truth, right? They're provisional. Putting confidence in the MyoHoRenGeKyo sutras, which are thoroughly revealing the truth. Should we depend on such Mahayana sutras as the Daingaku Shutara MyoHoRenGeKyo, the Perfect Enlightenment Sutra? Excuse me. And the Daibucho Norai Mitsuin Shusho MyoHoRenGeKyo, the Crown of the Buddha's Top Sutra, because they claim to be the MyoHoRenGeKyo in their titles? Right? Answer. The designation of MyoHoRenGeKyo and the MyoHoRenGeKyo differs comparatively. Compared to the teachings preached by the Buddha's disciples, such as the two vehicles, right, learning and realization, the Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas, and Bodhisattvas, which do not reveal the intent of the Buddha completely, the teachings expounded by the Buddha in his lifetime all reveal the truth completely. See, they're all truthful teachings. It's not a matter of the most recent one being more true than the others. It's simply that they're different in their teaching. Their meaning is more profound as we go on. Right? There's always this rub in the history of Buddhism with people claiming this is it, this is the one, this is the only one to follow. But they're not truly listening to Shakyamuni's program of elevating them step by step until they can practice the fully realized teaching. They just take off on their own and say, I've got it. This is the highest teaching. No, you're not paying attention. I've got it. They don't want to hear you. Right? So Nichiren's explaining that even though these provisional teachings are in fact teachings of Shakyamuni and Buddhism, we don't throw them away. We just understand their proper place in the scholarship. Regarding the teachings of the Buddha, Hinayana Sutras are the MyoHoRenGeKyo, while Mahayana Sutras are the MyoHoRenGeKyo. Of course, of Mahayana Sutras, those preached in the 40 years or so are MyoHoRenGeKyo, whereas such sutras as the Lotus Sutra, the Nirvana Sutra, and the Great Sun Buddha Sutra are MyoHoRenGeKyo. Such sutras as the Perfect Enlightenment Sutra and the Crown of the Buddha's Top Sutras are MyoHoRenGeKyo compared to Hinayana Sutras, and those Mahayana MyoHoRenGeKyo, which require eons of practice for attaining Buddhahood, However, they are not the MyoHoRenGeKyo as the Lotus Sutra is compared to all other sutras. Again, there's a bit of a word salad going on here. You kind of get bounced around. What are you saying? He's saying exactly what I was saying as preface, right? Within the scholarship, within the consecutive teachings, there is an order. And though some teachings, of course, all teachings at some point are more than what you knew before. That's the nature of learning and teachings. Come on, this is really basic stuff, right? There are levels, and there are levels not because they destroy the previous ones, but because they go further, and they're built on top of, until you reach the pinnacle. And once you practice the pinnacle, there's no need to go back and relearn the basics of walking if what you're working on is your sprints for an Olympic event. You don't need to relearn how to walk every time you show up to a track meet, right? That seems silly. So why wouldn't you think the same way with any teaching, right? However, we have to go through this because people are stubborn and lazy. I have to relearn something new. Something's better. I already know enough, right? That's what people do. How many of us are Olympic sprinters? Right? Question. Founders of sects other than the Tendai and Shingon, such as the Kigan, flower garland, Hoso and Sanran, each believed to have thoroughly mastered the profound doctrines of their respective canonical sutras. What do you think of this? I've already explained it, but okay. See, people have these doubts and these questions in Nichiren's day because they're learning from a master who purportedly has learned from his master and his master and his master. And so there are hundreds of years of conformity, somehow because of the duration and the lineage of these offshoots, these side chains, if you will. There's a modern term to throw into Buddhism. They believe, the practitioners believe, well, look at all this history in our sect. We must be right. So here comes Nichiren and says, no. Right? And they're stubborn. They don't want to hear that. So that's why he's questioning and answering this. Answer. According to the Flower Garland Sutra, the Kigan sect considers the other sutras expedients to preach the true dharma of the Flower Garland Sutra. See, this is where the problem comes in. Every one of these sects that decides that they're not going to practice self-practice, the Lotus Sutra, somehow denigrates the Lotus Sutra and makes all of the other sutras before and after the ones they prefer to be lesser. We want to practice this one, so we'll say it's the most important. But they have no basis in the teachings themselves to say that. It's still happening today. We have a sect that's running around saying that Nichiren predates Shakyamuni and his enlightenment. What? I mean, that's such a ridiculous statement. But they stick by it. Well, you made it up. And what's really doubly insulting about that is that that same sect is very much involved in the translations of the entire Gosho Zenshu, the writings of Nichiren. And those very writings never claim that. Nichiren never, in all the 330 so videos that I made, reading through and talking about each of those writings, Nowhere at any time did Nichiren ever make that claim. The only personage of Buddhist teachings that he ever claimed to be emulating was Bodhisattva superior practices, Jogyo. He identified with the Bodhisattva of the Lotus Sutra as the way he was living his life. And he did that very sparingly, but he did do that. He never said, I taught Shakyamuni. My enlightenment and my Buddhahood predated his. That is such an elementary schoolyard fantasy. That would never, knowing as much as we've read together of Nichiren's writings, he would never say such a thing. He was a very humble man. He was the adamant man that he understood the scholarship of Buddhism and the primary place of the lotus within the entire scholarship of Buddhism. And he didn't know that because he decided. He knows that because it says it in the sutras throughout. That's why he's our teacher. He's our mentor. He's following Shakyamuni. He never says he's telling Shakyamuni what to do. Buddha's Buddha. It's without time or space. That's why we want to awaken our earthly mind to that knowledge, to that experience. Buddha's Buddha. There's no before or after. That's samsaric crap, right? Manipulation. So any sect that tells you that, you should back up a little bit and go, okay, and walk away. So here we go. The Hoso sect regards such sutras as the Agama Sutras, right, in early teachings, and Wisdom Sutra with contempt, but equates the Flower Garland Sutra, the Lotus Sutra, and Nirvana Sutra to the Revealing the Profound and Secret Sutra as preachings of the middle way. Nevertheless, the sect maintains that both the Lotus and Nirvana Sutras are furyogi, not really revealing the true intent of the Buddha, as they preach the one vehicle teaching leading to Buddhahood for one group of people, whereas the Revealing the Profound and Secret Sutra is ryogi, completely revealing the truth because it preaches the, quote, 5 mutually distinctive natures. So they've decided that a certain teaching is more appealing to them, and that the Lotus Sutra is just for a small group of people. It doesn't apply to everyone. It's a special appealing, teaching. It's not for the public. When did Shakyamuni ever decide that he was going to teach the elite? Oh my God. Shakyamuni, Siddhartha Gautama, with all of his early years of seeking a truth, a universal truth, recognized that India was in a state of total magical thinking. So much folklore had entered what they were really practicing Vedic teachings, 12,000-year-old Vedic teachings about Brahma and the forces of the earth, right? We've talked about this. These incredible forces that you witness, like hurricanes, like tornadoes, like nightfall, Nature is full of these huge forces. And so they named those forces for gods, deities. They ran their lives according to the forces of nature, and then gradually over time they started inculcating, right? Inserting other stories, folklore, what we would call urban myths, and assigning them to the deeds of these personages. And from there, it just goes crazy. You can't even count the amount of the number of deities in all of India that are, there are festivals about them, there are rituals about them, right? On and on and on and on. In that situation, Siddhartha saw that. And he thought, man, we've got to strip this down to essentials. It can't be this crazy. Everybody's running their lives like they're being surveilled by these different influences and completely out of their own control. This is what led Siddhartha Gautama to seek out enlightenment. And that enlightenment, when he experienced it, discovered it, if you will, he named Buddha. And we can all experience the same thing, and that is the teaching of the Lotus Sutra. But it takes a while to build up the understanding of what it takes to find that, to accept it. However, in our day and age, our capacity, our understanding makes it immediate. It makes it quite essential, actually, because we're mired in our own problems. We don't have billions of deities to pay fear to, but we do have an excessive number of distractions. Same thing. In a very real way, it's the same thing. All you have to do is sit in a bus station for an hour and you'll see the deities. They require you to bend your head down and look at a little screen all day. Deities of technology, deities of, you name the attachment, right? So, again, let me finish that sentence. The revealing the profound and secret sutra is completely revealing the truth because it preaches the 5 mutually distinctive natures, approving attainment of Buddhahood by some, but not all people. Again, completely antithetical to the very effort Siddhartha made to discover enlightenment, to discover Buddha. And we chant it every time we recite Gongyo at the end of the Tathagata's lifespan chapter. I talked about this before, right? Every moment I think of how can I get others to experience this enlightenment, paraphrasing. That was Shakyamuni Buddha's constant refrain, and we recite it every day. So this is a completely false statement that Buddhahood is for some but not for others. See, that's a power trip, isn't it? That's an arrogant mind. That's an egotistical mind. I will be the judge of whether you can be enlightened or not. What? When was that ever in the teachings? It's a self-practice. You're the only judge. All right, moving on. The Sanran sect divides all the scriptures of Buddhism into 2 storehouses. Of the Shravaka storehouse, Hinayana, and the Bodhisattva storehouse, Mahayana. Based on the Wisdom Sutra, they do not discuss the comparative profundity among Mahayana, Bodhisattva, scriptures. These founders of various sects might have been the 4 reliances, Bodhisattvas relied upon by Buddhists as great teachers. They probably had profound reasons for establishing such classifications, which I dare not attempt to criticize. I mean, why bother? However, in order to dispel my own doubt, this is Nichiren being honest with everyone, setting aside their various opinions for now, let us examine those basic sutras on which they establish their sects. Once again, this is scholarship. This is Nichiren going, okay, they say this, but let's look at those actual texts and see if it agrees with these people's. Is it an opinion? Is it a system? Don't know quite what to call it yet. But you see what Nichiren's doing. He's saying, I'm not going to rely on my opinion, right? Let's say I have doubts about it myself. Let's go look at what they base their opinions on. The Flower Garland Sutra consists of either 50 or 60 facets in the old translation and 80 or 40 facets in the new translation. So obviously there are different apologies. I swear I should just turn this thing off. Sorry. All right. In neither of them is it clearly declared, as in the Lotus Sutra and the Nirvana Sutras, that all the sacred teachings of the Buddha's lifetime are expedient. In other words, preparatory or provisional. Although it preaches 4 kinds of teaching applicable to Shravakas and Pratyekabuddhas, Bodhisattvas and Buddhas, in explaining the teaching leading to Buddhahood, it does not reveal either the mutual possession of the 10 realms, the doctrine or the doctrine of the 3,000 realms in a single thought moment, right? Nor Shakyamuni Buddha's attainment of perfect enlightenment in the eternal past. In other words, the idea that Buddha isn't a human, it's a state of awareness, right? A clear understanding of the process of life. Doesn't say that. These 2 doctrines of the Lotus Sutra are the profoundest of all Buddhist doctrines. Therefore, the Lotus Sutra is incomparable to the Flower Garland Sutra. You can't compare it. Nevertheless, Chinese patriarchs of Flower Garland Buddhism established the doctrine of the 5 teachings, including various sutras, all in the first 4 teachings, which they call expedient to the 5th teaching, the Flower Garland Sutra. So they've just made up their own order of events to come back. And the Flower Garland Sutra was the first, the Avatamsaka sermon that Shakyamuni offered his followers. And it was way over their heads. So he had to come back to that after 40 or more years of leading up to what he was getting to. And in that time, he perfected how to teach the self-practice of the Lotus Sutra. And by then, people were prepared to understand it, but obviously they didn't necessarily choose to. So what could possibly be the reasons for them to deviate? I mean, the whole idea of Buddhism is Shakyamuni's teachings. Why would you then take those teachings to turn them in on themselves to, I see, avarice, greed, ego? Yeah, that makes sense. That's what always happens, right? It's like today we have a lot of people who use scientific terminology to sound like they're offering something of substance, when in fact they're just giving you gobbledygook to make it sound like they know, or to make it sound like, and they may know, but they make it sound like this is true rather than this. And because they put a bunch of scientific gobbledygook around it, oh, we'll just follow that. That must be true, without investigating further as to what their basis for saying those things is. That's all Nichiren is doing. He's saying, okay, you say that? Well, let's look at the actual teachings. They don't agree with you. All right, let's move on. Nevertheless, Chinese patriarchs have establishing the doctrine of the 3 period teachings, the Gosho sect equates such sutras as the Lotus to the Revealing the Profound and Secret Sutra as sutras preaching the middle way. Nowhere in the 5-faciled Revealing the Profound and Secret Sutra, however, is it clearly stated that such sutras as the Lotus be included in the Middle Way teaching. So how do you make that statement, right? Instituting the two storehouse doctrine, the Shanran sect, includes such sutras as the Flower Garland and Lotus in the Bodhisattva storehouse, equating them to the Wisdom Sutra. Going through the new translations of the 600-faciled Great Wisdom Sutra, however, there is no passage whatsoever that equates the Great Wisdom to the Lotus and Nirvana Sutras. So where'd they come up with that? Some claim that the Flower Garland Sutra is an abrupt teaching, whereas the Lotus Sutra is a gradual teaching. But this is an arbitrary classification established by Chinese teachers not based on the Buddha's words. I mean, you and I know that. The Avatamsaka is this long-winded experiential, you could make a great movie or series out of it, right? But the Lotus Sutra is about immediacy. So how did they flip that around? In the case of the Lotus Sutra, on the contrary, its preface, the Sutra of Infinite Meaning, clearly defines the years of preaching as 40 years or so, and names the titles of representative sutras as the Flower Garland, Hodo Sutras, Wisdom, and others, indefinitely states that the truth has not yet been revealed. That's part of what we memorized. It's part of the record as directly Shakyamuni's teachings. So obviously these teachers expected that the people they were teaching couldn't read, let alone get their hands on a facile or a copy, right? There was no printing press or internet back then, obviously, right? So a monk had to sit down and copy character for character every, Nichiren elicited, I think he said something like 6,900 and some characters that are the Lotus Sutra. I mean, you had to perfectly transcribe all of those in order to make a copy of this teaching for another monk to study. Because by that time, the oral tradition was waning. Even though it still exists, we still do it. But for study, writing has taken some precedence, right? But we still, when we chant, and answers another question I get from time to time, why do you chant? Because all of the teaching was chanted and experienced. See, that's the key in Buddhism. Buddhism isn't about believing in something other, in some other realm. It's about actually experiencing. That's your proof. Don't take the word for it. Don't take opinion for it. Do it. Do it yourself and experience it. And then let other people challenge you. I'm sorry, I experienced it. You're not going to convince me peanut butter is steak. Sorry, you're not going to do it. I've eaten them both. I know what one is and the other is. Right? Experience is truth. Right? In determining the comparative superiority of all sutras preached during his lifetime, in the main discourse of the Lotus Sutra proper, Shakyamuni Buddha uttered these golden words in the 10th chapter on the, quote, teaching of the Dharma chapter, right? The sutras I have preached number immeasurable thousands, 10,000s, 100 millions. How many times have I preached these teachings, these sutras? Of the sutras I have preached and am now preaching and will preach, this Lotus Sutra, this MyoHoRenGeKyo, is the most difficult to believe and the most difficult to understand. Because when you experience Buddha, I'll state the obvious. It's mind altering. Duh. That's the whole point. Just then, the Buddha of many treasures emerged from the underground in the 11th chapter on the appearance of the stupa of treasures, the treasure tower, the jeweled stupa, to testify, quote, what is said in the Lotus Sutra is all true, end quote. While Buddhas manifested in the numerous worlds all over the universe came together in the 21st chapter on the divine powers of the Buddha to attest it to be the truth by touching the Brahma heaven with their tongues. In other words, this is a symbolism of all speech, language, communication. This is the ultimate. Now, you can go, divine is an interesting word because it has a lot of, what's the word? Charisma about it. But all that is to say, as in my humble form, I try to explain, that the very process that manifests, that forms this experience we have of life is Buddha. But to experience it, know it, see it at work, be at one with it, requires our sentient mind, which is an emergent property of our being. So this is a very unique time for you and I, and for any sentient being, past or present or future, to experience that fundamental of fundamental realizations of how life exists. It's very reverential because it disconnects us from our petty little ownership of stuff. You can't put the universe in a box. If you can, I want to see the box. Okay. Taking these two into consideration, I guess it is my own hands to compare. It is in my own hands to compare the superiority and profundity in doctrine or difficulty in practice among sutras as numerous as the number of dust particles in the whole universe, including those transmitted to China and Japan, more than 5,000 facils in old translations and more than 7,000 facils in new translations. Those which have not been transmitted but existed in India, the Dragon's Palace and the Four King Heavens, those preached by the past 7 Buddhas, and those left out by Ananda's collection. He's talking about the various groups that got together, educated bodhisattva, educated monks, scholarly monks who'd gotten together to transcribe. And there's also, if you read about Gandhara area of India, in the last 20 years, they've dug up a lot of evidence of scribes who were hired to by the wealthy to transcribe these oral teachings and put them down into different scripts, different languages, right, which end up moving to China. So there's this incredibly rich history of trying to make sure we don't lose the Buddha's words, don't lose the key to our enlightenment, because lifetimes are relatively brief, and this has to be maintained. This anxiety about losing the teachings is as old as Shakyamuni, right? And so Nichiren is making reference to how this has moved all the way to Japan through its various scholarship, weeding out what was added that didn't belong and finding the core repeated throughout years and centuries and millennia of transcription. The truth becomes obvious because it's in all of them, as long as you get rid of the nonsense that people have added in ancient times, right? How can the, quote, immeasurable thousands, 10,000s, and 100 millions of sutras, end quote, referred to in the Teacher of the Dharma chapter of the Lotus Sutra not include every sutra preached by Shakyamuni Buddha? Is there any sutra that does not fall into the time span of the Buddha's preaching when he, quote, has preached, now preaches, and will preach them? And again, this is a statement by Nichiren that obviates that the teachings are primary, that he is not circumventing them or adding or subtracting anything from them. He's just using the entirety of Shakyamuni's scholarship and the scholarship of those who've done what he's... How many times have we read in the Lotus Sutra and other sutras? Read, recite, copy, and promulgate. Shakyamuni understood that this teaching would be lost if it were not for the local people in their local languages writing it down and keeping it alive. Again, this is why we recite the Gongyo and we chant the Daimoku, to keep it alive, to tell others about it so they can keep it alive. You could have the answer to everything in the universe, and if you don't tell anyone or write it down, it dies with you. Right? That's the point here. I pray that people, I hope that people in the latter age may somehow discard the meaningless doctrines established by founders of various sects on feeble scriptural bases, putting confidence in the significant teaching supported by Shakyamuni and the Buddha of many treasures, as well as numerous Buddhas manifested in the worlds all over the universe with strong evidence in the sutras. How much less should they rely on latter schools, or later schools, if you prefer, of various sects preoccupied with sectarian prejudices and the ignorant of the latter age who discard sutras and commentaries according to such latter sectarian scholars. Nichiren knew human nature in this era quite well, didn't he? Therefore, it is stated in the Nirvana Sutra, the postscript of the Lotus Sutra, which was preached last in the Sala forest, that the Buddha willed to Kasyapa Bodhisattva, quote, rely upon the Dharma preached by the Buddha, not upon the words of the man. Upon the true meaning of the Buddha, not upon the words and letters, upon wisdom, not upon knowledge, and upon the sutras completely revealing the true meaning, not upon sutras not completely revealing the true meaning. Self-practice. How many times have I referred to that statement in different form? Rely on the law, not the person. Rely on the meaning of the teaching, not the teacher. Yeah? As I observe the world today, Nichiren says, people praise a teacher of their own sect as enlightened and the first in wisdom, like he invented this whole thing. However, he is actually unenlightened without the virtue of converting people to the Dharma through the true sutras. He's moving you away from it. Instead, insisting that such sutras as the Sutra of Meditation on the Buddha of Infinite Life, which does not reveal the truth completely, are appropriate to the time and the capacity of the people. He discards the Lotus Nirvana Sutras, which thoroughly reveal the truth, despising them as too exquisite, as too good for people of this age. It's too good. Don't do it. How juvenile. That's amazing. In Doctrine for people in the latter age to understand, because we're too stupid to be enlightened. Is this not against the Buddha's will? Yeah. Telling people to rely upon the man, not upon the Dharma, upon the words and letters, not upon the true meaning, not upon sutras revealing the true meaning. I pray that those with right minds may think of this carefully. Right? I've reasoned this out. Now reason it out for yourself. It's in the very teachings themselves. Stop listening to persons who have their own agendas. Teach yourself. Self-practice. Namu MyoHoRenGeKyo. Get a mandala. Enshrine it. Make it your object of veneration and focus so that you can turn it inward, which you'll do automatically because you have this Buddha is part of your life. It's not going to take that much effort, just dedication. Namu MyoHoRenGeKyo. There it is. Oh, I've gone on longer than I thought. Okay, yeah, that's a good starting point for the next one. Thank you. Thank you for studying along with me and being here. As always, I urge you to take care of your health. Chant Namu MyoHoRenGeKyo with the confidence that you're awakening Buddha in your mind. Help others achieve the same thing. Be kind to yourself. Stop beating yourself up. Be kind to others. And don't forget all the resources here. The audio podcast, the website with all kinds of documents on several concepts of Buddhism, the bookstore, the Gohanzen store, right? Equip yourself and do this. This is yours. You can't rely on somebody else to give you or take your enlightenment. It's yours to experience. Do it. Do it today. Buddhas are standing by. Okay. Enough silliness. In all seriousness, you guys are amazing. You amaze me every day. Your questions, your comments, they remind me of how important this teaching is. It humbles me. Thank you. I'm very grateful for all your support. Like, subscribe, share, send support in any way that you can to keep this Sangha growing. And I will see you in the next one. All right? Bye for now.